Good morning, Jamie Breen here. It is May 13th, 2024. I'm back after a week of absence, a week of travel actually. I last spoke with y'all. I was taking the show on the road, as it were, and we were at the Cloister of Sea Island at a conference, which was really fun and learned a lot, had a lot of fun, saw some old friends, uh, talked shop, such as it is. But it was great time. And then just briefly home, and I attended a wedding out in California in Carmel, Sea Island to Carmel. Is this a bougie blog or what? But but it was really fun. I had actually never really been to Carmel. I had a client for a while in Santa Cruz, and I used to go to Santa Cruz, which is kind of a neat place also. But anyway, went to Carmel and then attended this wedding, which was fun. Actually saw a college teammate who's been out there in Carmel as a hedge fund marketer. Again, it's a pretty good gig if you can get it. And then down to Paso Robles, where I went around bunch of vineyards. The Paso Robles wine viniculture kind of industry has really gotten bigger and more interesting over the last 15 or 20 years. I know I haven't really been consuming alcohol, but I made a little bit of an exception and did a bit of wine tasting, and so that was fun. So anyway, sorry for my absence for the week, but that's I was out traveling and didn't really the schedule didn't work out to sit down and do this. So been an eventful week. Actually, just upon coming back, I missed a few days of swimming, but have kind of gotten back into the flow. Swam 4,700 this morning, so hopefully we're back on the good train. It's amazing, just a few days off, and you really feel it. As I've got this week, next week, really need to push hard, and then we can begin to have a little bit of fun, maybe drop the yardage a little bit as we prepare for the Masters Nationals. After that, I've got hopefully the 1st of July, I'm going to be able to finalize my arrangements for the 2026 attempt to swim the channel. So a bit going on the swimming front, and it's realizing, really is just taking a few days off, realizing what a blessing it is to have the ability to work out and be in the kind of physical shape that I'm in, and that's kind of this week's segue. I don't know whether y'all are followers of the music scene, but last week we lost one of the leading kind of lights in the alternative music sphere. Is a guy named Steve Albini, who passed away, had a heart attack last week. Steve was 61 years old, only 61, and Steve had been he didn't like to call himself a producer, although that, from the perspective of traditional roles in the making of records, that's essentially what he was largely known as a record producer. Produced Nirvana's In Utero album, the Pixies, hundreds and hundreds of other bands, many of whom you've heard of, most of whom you probably haven't. I certainly hadn't. Steve also fronted two pretty well-known kind of proto-punk bands, Big Black and more recently Shellac, and really a very well-known music guy, and somebody that my son, who's a musician, a guitar guy. Well, he plays guitar, bass, and drums, but primarily a guitar guy. And Steve was one of the big heroes of my son, and many people in that whole, particularly the more kind of proto-punk noise, sort of the Black Flag and that kind of stuff. But the reason I bring Steve up, other than Jesus, I'm really sorry to hear of this. I actually had a history with Steve, and Steve attended Northwestern University same time I did back in the early '80s, and sort of two stories about him. He was known on campus as being just a really weird guy, but weird in kind of a cool way. He was just cooler than everybody else was, and maybe that's self-promotion at some level, but no, he really was. And so I found myself one of the summers between academic years. I used to work on the beach as a Northwestern beach, which is on Northwestern University is right on Lake Michigan, and so I was a lifeguard on the beach. Was a summer job, which was again paid more than most of the jobs I've ever had, but that beach lifeguard job probably is the best job I've ever had. Actually, I was on the same crew as the guy who's the Carmel hedge fund marketer, and he'd probably say the same thing. So anyway, I'm working on the beach. Is kind of the job I have, and I also, the WNUR, the campus radio station, during the main school year when everybody was on campus, the WNUR crew or crowd was a pretty cliquey and tight organization, and it would have been difficult for a guy like me, swimming jock lifeguard to manage to get a radio show. But because it was the summer and no one was around and no one really gave a shit, and they needed people, I found myself doing I was on the radio from like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. doing a show, kind of free form rock and roll. My limited knowledge, even more limited at that time. But it was fun, and I discovered, people would call in requests. I remember hearing the Stray Cats for the first time. Somebody calls and wanted to hear Stray Cats strut. I had never heard of the damn Stray Cats, but it sounded okay, and I found the thing in the record library and put it on, and listening to it, I'm like, whoa, this is really good. So anyway, that was I did an okay job, and certainly had fun doing it. So anyway, one day I'm in there doing my show, and Steve Albini comes in, and I was just finishing, and he's come in because he's doing the show, from 9 until noon. And now we had the studio was old, but it was wall to wall, covered in racks of records, thousands and thousands of records. Our record library was pretty good, and it was an old studio in the basement of what was Annie Mae Swift, which was the School of Speech building on campus, and the radio station probably was the same as it was in the 50s when I was there. The equipment hadn't been upgraded a whole lot, but it was a pretty cool place. But Steve comes in, and our 10 or 15,000 records in the studio aren't enough for Steve. He comes in with a basket full of his own records, way cooler than anything that we had or I had. And and so he comes in with that, and he's got some incense, because you need incense if you're going to get the right vibe in the studio. I smelled like chlorine personally, but anyway, so Steve comes in and he looks at me, and I'd actually played a deep cut off of what was then the just released Dave Davies, the guitarist for the Kinks and brother of Ray Davies. I had just played a deep cut on this soul album that he had released that probably only sold 100 copies. It never really found its audience, but I've always been a great admirer of Dave Davies' guitar playing. So I played that cut and a couple of other things that were a little bit obscure, and Steve Albini comes in, he says to me, that show I was listening to, you're pretty good for a fucking jock. I took that as high praise coming from Steve Albini. Another great, I'll tell this story and then one other and try to tie it together. The first performance art I ever experienced was probably that next year. Again, it was Steve Albini. He got a column in the Daily Northwestern in the spring quarter, and so this is we were on quarters at Northwestern. So we come back after Christmas and we're going to go there's a week of spring break, but basically you go till June, and that's the spring quarter. And so Steve was writing a column in the Daily Northwestern, and it was so inflammatory, and he would insult every sort of identifiable group on campus, the jocks, the frat boys, the sorority girls, the tech geeks, the whoever, I mean, whatever, the theater people, whatever kind of discernible group. I mean, and certainly music people. He was every group he could think of. He would write just inflammatory, nasty stuff about, and really pissed people off. And what did you write this week? It was kind of a little bit a buzz on the campus. Well, who was Steve Albini tearing into this week? And so at the end of the quarter, he takes out an ad in the Daily, and full page ad, and there's a picture of him, and he says, look, for $1, you pay $1, and you can come down behind the student center, behind the Norris Center. I'm going to have a plexiglass shield, and you can throw anything you want at Steve Albini, and it's for $1. It's going to cost you $1 to do this. And so it was crazy. I mean, 100 people showed up to throw stuff at Steve Albini, and there were, batteries and rocks and all sorts. Sorority girls were crapping in sort of Chinese food containers so that they could throw their own poop at Steve Albini. That's how pissed off they were at him. And I realized when this happened, the whole thing had been a setup. The whole thing had been a performance art setup to, sort of the process of using the speech he used or using the writing that he used to elicit this response. And I don't think that there was a lot of moralizing upon the response. It was just the response. The point of the piece was the piece. And that taught me something about performance art that I didn't understand to that point. It was brilliant. And so Steve was obviously an iconoclastic guy, a brilliant guy. But I'll say one other thing. My son and I, like many parent-child relationships, I mean, we have our ups and we have our downs, and there's things I would like him to do. And we've gone through some good times and some bad times, and we've had times that it's been difficult for us to communicate. But one thing that we always had, and two things. We always had a common love of Chicago Bears football, and then we also had, I had this great story that Steve Albini told me that my radio show didn't suck, and so. And Bo had told all of his friends about this, and so anyway, Shellac comes to town, and they're playing somewhere in Atlanta here, and Bo with a bunch of his buddies go, and they're way into this, and at the end of the show or after the show, Steve is sort of on the front of the stage, and people are just kind of hanging around and staying, and he's sort of holding court, and he's sort of chatting with anybody that's interested in staying and listening to him. And so Bo goes, my dad tells this story, we're back in college, you were doing that, and he said his show didn't suck for a jock and all this. And I wonder, is that something I should believe? And Albini looks at him and goes, that is something I would believe. And with all of his friends there, it made me a slight celebrity for a small period of time. So I have to thank him for that. And, what an interesting fellow. The other piece, though, I'll say, tying it back, I saw recent pictures of him, and apparently he was a guy that was not, the rock and roll lifestyle. Apparently he wasn't a big drug guy and wasn't a big drinker or anything like that. But he just looked to me in recent pictures kind of unhealthy, out of shape, eating the American diet, and that was something that, in your mind's eye, he's always the guy behind the plexiglass, shield getting sorority girl shit thrown at him, or the guy that, came in, the really thin, most painfully thin, guy that came into the studio that day, and sort of seeing the recent pictures just realizes, number one, nothing's guaranteed, tomorrow isn't guaranteed for anybody, but number two, the whole fitness and trying to eat right thing probably is a good idea. So Anyway, I'm not going to moralize any more than that, but just to say thanks for watching, and hopefully we won't miss again next week. We're sort of here in the world headquarters of the James Breen vlog for the next couple weeks, so I look forward to seeing you then. So have a great day. Thank you.